We're here at the Arabia Steamboat Museum, which is directly next to City Market. And it's a great place to stop by because it's really close to a lot of shops and restaurants. This spot was recommended by Morgan Nicole Brooks on Instagram, who said that this museum is really underrated. As a traveling history nerd myself, this place really intrigues me. The Arabia Steamboat sank in the Missouri River, bringing down with it 200 tons of cargo. In the 80s, all of this stuff was excavated, and it gives like a really cool slice of life of what it was like in Kansas City during the 1800s. Let's take a look inside. The Arabia Steamboat Museum houses an impressive collection of pre-Civil War artifacts. In fact, it's actually the largest collection of its kind in the world. What makes this collection even more special is how pristine it is. On September 5th, 1856, the Steamboat Arabia got snagged on a tree and sank in the Missouri River right outside of Kansas City. The only life lost was that of a single mule whose bones are on display. The steamboat was transporting settler supplies that never reached their final destination, meaning most of the things on board were never used. Exploring the exhibit, it's hard not to be overwhelmed by the quantity and quality of the items on display.
It's amazing the amount of artifacts this museum has, even down to tiny little buttons, all of which are perfectly preserved as if no time had gone by. It's so beautiful.
It's so much stuff. What does 200 tons of cargo look like? It's these plates that they almost look like you could even use them today. That's how well preserved they are. I feel like that style of plate is almost coming back. Like I could walk into a Williams-Sonoma and buy something just like that. Only this one is over 135 years old.
The Steamboat Arabia was like a floating superstore of the frontier. It traveled westward via the Missouri and Kansas rivers and made stops at settlements to sell things like plates, clothing, cookware, keys, doorknobs, all kinds of bric-a-brac. Anything and everything that settlers would need for their homesteads.
It's little pieces of everyday life. Coffee tin. We start our morning very much the same way today. I like the little muffin tins.
Because the ship was preserved in mud, these objects were hit with neither light nor oxygen for over 130 years. The museum has an active preservation lab on site where you can watch scientists work to clean and preserve the artifacts from the dig. You can even ask them questions. Among the most interesting things you'll find at this museum are elixirs, medicines, and even foods still preserved in their jars. It's crazy, even the little bottles of castor oil and Maguire's elixir still have the contents in the bottles. And just how well preserved everything is. Like it's frozen in time. Now I know what you're thinking. Was anyone brave enough to try any of this stuff? I asked Josh, the office manager of the museum, this burning question.
There was a lot of food items that were found aboard the Arabia, and the way it sank, it was far enough in the mud that it had a cold, consistent temperature, no oxygen, almost no light, so almost like a perfect freezer type environment. So some of that food items were still edible when they dug it back up. Early in the dig process, a few of the bottles, when they were getting moved from place to place, adjusted from that cold temperature to a bit warmer, and then the corks popped off the top. Since they were already open, one of the guys who did the dig, Jerry, he went ahead and sampled a pickle. He said it still tasted sweet. It was good, maybe not as crisp as it should have been, but it still tasted good.
If the story of a sunken ship with around 200 tons of pre-Civil War artifacts and, well, pickles on board doesn't intrigue you, the story behind its discovery certainly will.
I'm David Hawley. I was one of the 5 guys that helped dig up this boat. My dad, my brother, myself, Jerry Mackey, the restaurant guy, and Dave Luttrell, the construction guy. My dad, my brother, and I were in the heating and air conditioning business. We were not archaeologists, we were not artifact experts, nor was any of the other guys, the restaurant guy and the construction guy. And so we wondered as we dug, what would we find? What would be the first thing we'd find on this boat, and would we even recognize it when we saw it? Well, down we go, and on the very back of the boat, we found the very first artifact. It was a black shoe. Okay? Well, everybody knows what shoes are, but we scooped it up, washed it off, looked at it, and we were surprised to find it was not made of leather. It's made out of rubber. And on the bottom of it, the name of the company that made it, this pre-Civil War boat artifact, said the Goodyear Rubber Company. And we first thought was, oh my gosh, we've dug the wrong boat. We've dug a later boat, 1880s or 90s. How could they find a Goodyear shoe on a pre-Civil War boat? They were making rubber shoes by then, by the late 1840s, you know? So we found hundreds of rubber shoes, rubber hair combs, buttons. We're told it's the oldest archaeological rubber that exists. The old rubber was not stable, and the oxygen and the rubber didn't get along, and they just turned to jelly at some point. Ours survived because there was no air where it lay on that boat for all those many years. And the display that we have them in now has no air in it. It's all filled with nitrogen, so we can display it.
It felt like a rare and special occasion to run into one of the guys who made this incredible discovery. I mean, how many times in your life are you going to meet a real-life treasure hunter? And in the Midwest, no less. But it turns out David is at the museum almost every day, sharing the story of the Arabia with folks from Kansas City and beyond. There are thousands of objects in this museum, but I wanted to know, what was David's favorite?
Okay, so a lot of boxes. We found boxes and barrels. That's how everything was stored as it shipped. One day we found this really big box, and curious, we opened it up and discovered it was the ice box where they put big blocks of ice and the food for the passengers as it traveled. So out of the box came this big copper tray. It was the dinner serving tray. And on the tray were the leftovers from the last meal they ate 132 years earlier. The cow bones and pig bones still on the tray.
I asked David to show me where the serving tray was. I had spent hours taking in the museum's many wonders and didn't remember seeing it. When he pointed it out, I could see just how easy it was to miss.
That's the tray right there.
That's okay. Yeah, we did see this because I thought because I saw the mule and I thought, wait, did more animals die on the?
No, this was in the boat. That low spot on the tray was the gravy bowl where the juices would sort of pool up and they could keep it spooned on the meat and keep it wet. But that's not the prettiest thing we ever found on the boat, but it's interesting. It's got an interesting story.
It tells a story about the moment that it sank, that people were gathering, they were enjoying a meal, and then they had to get up and run, and their food was
left behind.
These things might seem mundane, but David's enthusiasm for everything from bones on a serving tray to the ship's perfectly preserved window panes is infectious. Because to David and his team, these objects are more than just plates, shoes, buttons, and other odds and ends. The Steamboat Arabia is a moment frozen in time. It's a rare glimpse into life on the frontier where everyday objects tell the story of everyday people. And how the boat was discovered over a century later adds another adventurous chapter to the Steamboat Arabia's history.
It's a great story. It's a story of just everyday folks that did sort of an unusual thing. And somehow, some way, were successful in pulling it off. And beyond all odds, it was to think that some guys are just going to go out and dig up a steamboat and preserve the largest collection of all of this and keep it together without selling it ever is kind of remarkable, actually.